The Haunted Christmas Eve. The Black Dog Under the Moonlight. Hidden deep within the Snow Ridge Mountains in Yunnan, China, lay a small town called Baishan. With its ancient, snow-covered rooftops, the town exuded a peaceful charm. Yet, beneath this tranquility, Baishan was steeped in eerie legends. The locals believed that on Christmas Eve, wandering spirits would try to communicate with the living. The story begins with Lin Yang, a 25-year-old man returning to the town after years of living in the city. Lin Yang was a devoted animal lover, and his only companion was a large black dog named Hei Mao. On Christmas Eve that year, he decided to take a walk with Hei Mao to enjoy the serene winter night, unaware that this walk would lead to one of the most terrifying experiences of his life. The familiar path led Lin Yang to a snow-covered field near a forest. The air was biting cold, and the pale moonlight cast an eerie glow over everything. As the pair approached the town's old cemetery, Hei Mao suddenly stopped. The fur on his back bristled, and he stared intently at a dark corner of the graveyard. Following Hei Mao's gaze, Lin Yang saw a faint figure standing among the snow-covered gravestones. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice echoing in the silence. There was no reply, just the sound of the cold wind whistling past, filling him with a growing unease. Suddenly, the figure disappeared, and Hei Mao began barking furiously. Lin Yang tugged on the leash, trying to leave quickly, but just as he turned to go, he heard a faint voice whisper, "Help me?" The words seemed to come from the ground beneath him. He froze, his heart pounding, before gathering the courage to walk away, the words still echoing in his ears. As they continued on their way, fresh snow began falling, blanketing the ground. Lin Yang noticed strange footprints ahead of them. These were unlike anything he'd seen before. Not human, not the tracks of any animal he knew. They resembled wolf tracks but were much larger and glowed faintly under the moonlight. Hei Mao started whining, pulling Lin Yang toward the tracks. Reluctantly, Lin Yang followed. His curiosity piqued despite his fear. The tracks led them to an abandoned house at the edge of town. The house looked ancient, its wooden door rotted and its windows draped in cobwebs. Under the moonlight, it loomed like a giant shadow, foreboding and silent. Inside, the air was damp and icy cold, and every breath Lin Yang took was visible in the form of white mist. The scent of mildew and decay was overwhelming. Using his flashlight, Lin Yang scanned the room. Everything was covered in dust and cobwebs, untouched for years, everything except for a wooden table in the center, where a feast of freshly prepared food Saturday inexplicably pristine. Hei Mao whimpered, his body stiff as he stared at a shadowy corner of the room. Following the dog's gaze, Lin Yang's flashlight revealed a young woman sitting in the corner. She wore a white dress, her long hair obscuring her face. Who are you?" Lin Yang stammered, but there was no reply. Slowly, the woman raised her head, revealing a pale, lifeless face and glowing red eyes. A cold smile spread across her lips, and the room instantly felt as if it had dropped to sub-zero temperatures. Hei Mao lunged at her, barking ferociously, but as he got close, the woman vanished into thin air. The feast on the table disintegrated into ash, scattering in the icy wind that now howled through the house. Terrified, Lin Yang fled the house with Hei Mao and returned home. The next morning, he recounted the events to his grandfather, a man well-versed in the town's history and folklore. His grandfather listened in silence before sighing deeply. That house belonged to the Liu family, the wealthiest family in Baishan more than 50 years ago. But on Christmas Eve in 1970, the entire family was murdered. The youngest daughter, Luya, was reportedly killed in the cemetery while searching for her beloved pet dog. People say her spirit still roams on Christmas Eve, searching for her family and her dog. Lin Yong shivered as he remembered the red eyes and the icy atmosphere in the house. "What about those strange footprints?" he asked. His grandfather's face grew somber. "They're likely from her dog's spirit. It seems to linger near her, protecting her even in death." Determined to find closure, Lin Yong decided to return to the abandoned house the following night. Armed with a lantern and offerings, he intended to pray for Luya and her dog to find peace. When he arrived, the house was unchanged, still emanating an air of desolation. Lin Yong lit a lantern and placed it at the doorway, setting down a silver pendant engraved with the name Luya, an heirloom his grandfather had found years ago in their storage. As he began to pray, a gust of icy wind blew through, and the girl's apparition appeared again. This time, her expression was one of sorrow rather than malice. Lin Yong spoke softly, "I mean no harm. I only want to help you find peace." He placed the pendant on the ground before her. The ghost hesitated before reaching for the pendant. As her fingers touched it, her figure began to fade, and a faint smile graced her lips. "Thank you," she whispered before disappearing completely. After that night, the graveyard grew quieter, and the eerie tales about the abandoned house faded. Lin Yong and He Mao lived peacefully, no longer troubled by supernatural occurrences. However, on Christmas Eve each year, Lin Yong would look up at the moonlit sky, wondering if Luya's spirit had finally reunited with her family and her loyal dog. Deep down, he felt she was watching over him, her glowing red eyes now a comforting memory of a ghostly Christmas miracle. The mysterious guest in the old boarding house. In 1992, I moved to a small town in Vermont to start a new job at the town's historical library. The library, housed in a marble building, held thousands of rare and valuable books. Although I was excited about the job, my finances were tight, so I rented a room in an old boarding house on the outskirts of town. The house was a two-story building constructed in the 1930s, divided into 6 rental rooms. My room was on the second floor, near the stairs, and I shared a bathroom with a woman named Ellie. Ellie was friendly but often busy with her job at the hospital, so we rarely crossed paths. The landlady, Mrs. Agnes, was an elderly woman with silver hair and a kind demeanor, though her eyes carried a hint of mystery. From the first day I moved in, I couldn't shake the eerie atmosphere of the house. The dark wooden walls, the creaking staircase, and the cold drafts seeping through the windows sent shivers down my spine. But with my limited budget, I had no choice but to adjust. One quiet Sunday afternoon, while Ellie was away visiting her family, I decided to spend the day relaxing. Around 5 p.m., as I was reading in my room, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Thinking Ellie had returned early, I opened the door to check, but the hallway was empty. The only light came from the dim, flickering bulb on the ceiling. I returned to my room, but the sensation of being watched lingered. Uneasy, I decided to check the shared bathroom. The bathroom door was slightly ajar. Pushing it open, I froze in place. A woman was standing in front of the mirror. She had long, dark brown hair parted in the middle and wore a pale blue vintage dress with delicate floral patterns. Her attire reminded me of the 1950s. She didn't acknowledge me, but instead focused on brushing her hair as she stared into the mirror. "Excuse me, who are you? Why are you here?" I stammered. She slowly turned to face me. Her eyes were sad, filled with an inexplicable sorrow. Before I could react, She vanished into thin air. I staggered back, heart pounding, nearly tripping over the doorframe. My mind raced with a single question. What did I just see? The next morning, Ellie returned. I told her about the woman in the bathroom, but she just laughed and said, "You must have been imagining things after reading too many scary novels." Still, there was a flicker of hesitation in her eyes, as though she knew something she wasn't saying. Unable to let it go, I decided to ask Mrs. Agnes about the house's history. When I described the woman I had seen, she paused, setting her teacup down with a sigh. "That would be Clara," she said. "Clara? Who is she?" I asked. Mrs. Agnes explained that the house was originally a grand residence owned by a wealthy family in the 1930s and 1940s. Clara, the eldest daughter, was a beautiful but reserved young woman. In 1957, fire broke out, destroying part of the house. Clara was trapped in the bathroom and perished. The story goes that her spirit never left. Mrs. Agnes added softly, "I've never seen her myself, but many boarders before you have told similar stories." I tried to dismiss the tale as a local legend, but a week later, while Ellie was working a night shift, I experienced something I couldn't ignore. Around 1 a.m., I was awakened by the sound of running water in the bathroom. First, I thought Ellie had come home early, but when I peeked into the hallway, her door remained shut. The water continued to flow, steady and persistent, summoning all my courage. I stepped out of my room. The bathroom door swayed slightly, as if pushed by a breeze. I opened it to find the sink overflowing with water. Yet no one was there. A faint scent of vintage perfume lingered in the air. Then, in the mirror above the sink, I saw Clara. She stood behind me, her gaze sad but not menacing. This time, she didn't disappear immediately. She smiled faintly, as if trying to communicate something. I stepped back, trembling, but she remained still, her presence strangely calm. "What do you want from me?" I whispered. Clara didn't speak. Instead, she raised a finger to her lips, signaling me to stay quiet. Moments later, she faded away. The next morning, I shared everything with Ellie. This time, she didn't laugh. Instead, she admitted that she, too, had seen Clara before. "I didn't tell anyone because I thought they'd think I was crazy," she confessed, determined to learn more. We visited the town library to dig into Clara's story. In a dusty corner of the archives, we found a short newspaper article from 1957 detailing the fire. Clara was described as a quiet girl who loved poetry and often spent hours in the bathroom writing in her journal. Returning to the boarding house, Ellie and I decided to search for the journal. After hours of looking, we discovered a hidden compartment under the bathroom sink. Inside was a weathered leather notebook, its pages filled with Clara's handwriting, poems about love, loneliness, and longing. From that day on, I was no longer afraid of Clara. Instead, I came to see her as a quiet presence, a reminder of the house's history. Every time I entered the bathroom, I could feel her lingering, and the faint scent of her perfume became familiar. Clara never appeared again after we found her journal. I like to believe that by uncovering her words, we gave her the peace she had been searching for. Ellie and I decided to keep the journal as a keepsake, a token of a life that had once been, and a gentle reminder of the past. Clara's story became a part of my own tale I'll never forget. Taught me that sometimes the mysteries of the past aren't meant to frighten us, but to help us understand and cherish the lives that came before ours. The Stranger in Apartment 304. when I moved to the city for college. I rented a small apartment on the third floor of an old building. Apartment 304 was located in a complex built in the 1970s. While the exterior looked ordinary enough, the narrow hallways and dim yellow lights gave the place an eerie, unsettling vibe. First, I enjoyed the privacy of my new home. It was just the right size for one person, with a cozy living room, a small bedroom, and a kitchen connected to a hallway leading to the bathroom. I spent my free time watching movies, studying, or sketching. My student life was simple and peaceful, but after just a few weeks, I began to feel that something wasn't quite right. One evening, as I sat on the couch watching a movie, I caught a glimpse of a shadow moving across the hallway that led to the bathroom. It was just a fleeting movement in the corner of my eye, but it was enough to make me freeze. I quickly turned my head, but the hallway was empty. I tried to reassure myself that I was just tired from a long day of classes. Yet, the feeling of unease grew stronger. Every time I sat in the living room after that, I felt like someone was standing at the far end of the hallway, silently watching me. Occasionally, I'd hear faint clicking sounds, like hard-soled shoes tapping lightly against the wooden floor. But whenever I got up to check, the hallway was always empty. One night, around 11 p.m., I was getting ready for bed. While brushing my teeth in the bathroom, I felt a sudden chill in the air. It was strange. Given the warm temperature of the room, I assumed I'd left a window open. But when I glanced up at the mirror, I froze in terror. Through the reflection, I saw a man standing behind me. He was tall, dressed in a long coat, with a pale face and sunken, hollow eyes. I didn't stop to think. I screamed, dropped my toothbrush, and bolted out of the bathroom. The apartment was deathly silent. I quickly locked myself in the bedroom, hiding under the covers with my heart racing, trying to listen for any noise outside. But nothing happened. The next morning, I left the apartment as soon as the sun came up. I decided to share my story with the building's security guard. He smiled at first, but when I mentioned apartment 304, his expression turned serious. "You're not the first person to say something like this," he said. "The last tenant in that apartment mentioned seeing a shadowy figure, too, but he moved out." His words unsettled me. That evening, I met my neighbor from apartment 305, an elderly woman who had lived in the building since it was first constructed. When I told her about what had happened, she sighed and shared a chilling story. "This building used to be a dormitory for factory workers," she explained. "In 1978, there was a massive fire. Many people died, including a man who lived in room 304. He died in the fire, and they didn't find his body until days later. After hearing the story, I began paying more attention to the strange occurrences in my apartment. Small items like pens, keys, and cups would frequently go missing, only to reappear in places I couldn't remember putting them. One night, while I was sleeping, I woke up to the feeling of something tugging lightly on my blanket. I couldn't go back to sleep. I turned on the lights and sat on my bed, feeling like someone else was in the room. Not long after, I heard footsteps in the hallway. This time, I decided I couldn't stay silent anymore. I got up, opened the door, and shouted, "What do you want? Leave me alone." The apartment remained silent, but as soon as I shut the door, I heard a soft, faint laugh coming from the living room. I couldn't take it anymore. I started researching the building's history. At the city library, I found an old newspaper article about the 1978 fire. According to the report, the man who lived in apartment 304 was named Robert Harris. He was a lonely factory worker, known for his reclusive behavior. Some rumors suggested that he might have started the fire himself out of despair. The story sent chills down my spine. Was Robert's spirit still lingering in the apartment, trying to communicate with the living, or was he simply protecting the space he had once called home? I decided to perform a simple ritual to release Robert's spirit. I lit a candle, placed it in the living room, and said aloud, "Robert, if you're here, please move on. You've suffered enough." Nothing happened at that moment, but from that night on, the apartment felt calmer. I no longer saw shadows in the mirror or heard footsteps in the hallway. Even so, I chose to leave apartment 304 when my lease ended. The experiences there were a reminder that the things we can't see are often the most terrifying. Before I left, I wrote a small note and left it on the table. To the next tenant of this apartment, if you meet Robert, be kind. He's just a lost soul. I hope that whoever comes after me won't have to endure the long, harrowing nights I experienced. But sometimes, the past doesn't fade so easily. The Curse of Oriala. It was a cold October evening, and I was heading home after a late shift at a small cafe in Moonridge, a quiet rural town nestled at the foot of the Cascade Mountains. The clock had just struck 10 p.m., but I decided to stop by a familiar antique shop before it closed. Among the dusty shelves of old ceramic vases and vintage clocks, my eyes landed on a silver necklace. The necklace featured a crescent moon pendant etched with intricate patterns and symbols I had never seen before. It immediately reminded me of Ellie, my neighbor, who loved collecting unique jewelry. Ellie had always been kind to me, often bringing over freshly baked goods whenever she had time. I decided to buy the necklace and leave it on her porch as a surprise gift. Moonridge was a peaceful place, surrounded by dense pine forests and rugged dirt paths. Occasionally, I would hear the distant howls of coyotes or the hoot of an owl echoing through the woods. The town's ancient maple trees had turned fiery red and orange, adding a touch of mystery to the air. I often wondered what this land must have looked like when it was home to the native tribes, long before settlers claimed it as their own. By the time I got home, it was nearly midnight. The air was crisp and unnervingly still. Holding the necklace in my hand, I decided to walk over to Ellie's house, which was only about 50 steps away. For reassurance, I brought along my dog, Max, a strong and lively Labrador retriever. The path between our houses was dark, illuminated only faintly by the moonlight. I watched my footing carefully, wary of the uneven dirt road. Max wandered lazily, sniffing the ground and exploring the bushes. As I approached Ellie's porch, just a few steps away, I suddenly heard a voice. It was a woman's voice, hoarse, hollow, and echoing, as if coming from the depths of the night. "Oriala," it said. I froze in my tracks, every muscle in my body locking up. My heart pounded violently in my chest, and I felt a chill run down my spine. The voice was so close that I could almost feel cold breath on the back of my neck. Max didn't react at all, continuing to sniff around without a care. Slowly, I turned my head to look behind me. There was nothing there. The path was empty, save for the shadows of trees swaying in the moonlight. Yet I felt an oppressive weight, as though invisible eyes were watching me from every direction. Quickly, I left the necklace on Ellie's porch, called for Max, and rushed home without looking back. Once inside, I locked the doors and windows tightly. Max jumped onto the couch as though nothing had happened, but I couldn't shake the unease. The word Oriala echoed in my mind, relentless and haunting, like a curse that had been whispered into my soul. The next morning, I tried searching online for the meaning of the word. I scoured dictionaries, forums, and language databases but found nothing. It seemed to have no origin, no history, no connection to anything familiar. And then, the misfortunes began. First, I lost my job. The cafe where I worked announced it was closing due to financial difficulties. My manager handed me my final paycheck with an apologetic smile. Despite applying to numerous other jobs, I found no luck. Next, Max, my vibrant, healthy dog, suddenly fell ill. He stopped eating, grew lethargic, and whimpered in pain. A trip to the vet revealed an uncommon and untreatable lung condition. 2 weeks later, I buried Max in the woods behind my cabin. Then my car broke down. The transmission failed catastrophically, and I couldn't afford the repairs. Without public transportation in Moonridge and the nearest bus stop miles away, I had to cancel all plans, including a visit to my family in the neighboring town. Finally, my closest friend, Claire, called me with devastating news. She had been diagnosed with terminal cancer. Claire was the most vibrant and supportive person in my life, someone I leaned on through every hardship. I visited her immediately, but just days later, she passed away. Within 3 months, everything precious to me had been taken away. One sleepless night, I decided to delve deeper into the history of Moonridge. I visited the town library, where old archives were stored. Buried among the dusty records, I uncovered a shocking revelation. The area where I lived had once been part of a burial ground belonging to a now extinct native tribe. The graves were desecrated and removed in the late 19th century when settlers took over the land to build the town. Among the historical notes, I found a reference to a spiritual figure called Oriala. According to legend, Oriala was a sacred protector of the land. It was believed that anyone who violated or disrespected the land would face Oriala's wrath, a series of relentless misfortunes that could not be escaped. I knew I couldn't ignore the curse any longer. On the advice of a local historian specializing in indigenous cultures, I prepared a simple ritual to seek forgiveness. That night, I returned to the spot where I had first heard the voice. I brought a bundle of sage, a small bowl of corn, and a white candle. I knelt on the ground, lit the candle, and spoke into the stillness of the night. "I'm sorry, Oriala. I didn't mean to disrespect this sacred land. Please, forgive me." The wind began to howl, swirling the dry leaves around me. For a moment, I thought I saw a shadow, a faint figure in the distance watching me. But when I blinked, it was gone. I remained there, waiting, until the candle burned out. In the weeks that followed, my life slowly began to piece itself back together. I found a part-time job at a cafe in town. I adopted a new puppy to fill the void left by Max, though his absence still weighed heavily on me. Yet the word Oriala lingered in my mind. Was the curse truly lifted, or was it merely lying dormant? Even now, when I walk through the woods at night, I feel the presence of something watching me, but instead of fear, I feel a sense of reverence, a lesson learned about the unseen forces that surround us. Not everything invisible is malevolent, but it all deserves our respect. Thank you for spending your time with us tonight, exploring these mysterious and spine-chilling stories. If these tales have sparked your curiosity or left you with unforgettable feelings, don't hesitate to share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've had similar paranormal experiences that you'd like to share, feel free to send your story to the email address provided in the description. Who knows? Your story might become part of our journey into the spiritual world in a future episode. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our haunting tales. See you in the next episode, and remember, always keep a light by your side.